It all begins with this man telling Jen Chen, who is our, if perhaps he has been reborn, and after telling us a little about himself, he tells us that his name is, by someone. The girl, with a trembling voice and a strange feeling, asks him, to the man who had her subjugated, what he did to her, and why it's so hot, threatening him, saying his grandfather won't let him off so easily, but he, with a manic look on his face, he tells the girl that as long as she eats his bun, her grandfather, Tian Mi, will have no choice but to ask him to marry her. And of course, when he refers to a bun, well, we can imagine what the boy is implying without. When he refers to boyo, well, we can imagine what the boy is referring to without. However, this man's plans were seemingly collapsing, as Yan Chen ends up appearing on the scene to demand he release the girl, which he has no intention of doing, instead, telling the protagonist to let her times go, asking if he even knows who he is, and threatening the protagonist that if he doesn't, Jen Chen, the king of the immortal world, possesses the largest city within it. Leave, he'll have to hurt him. The protagonist, who doesn't take threats from anyone, a little annoyed, he tells him again to let the girl go, but the man doesn't listen to reason and he ends up launching himself at the protagonist with a blade in hand. But, however, what he didn't expect was that Yan Chen would stop his attack, with only 2 fingers, which obviously leaves him surprised, but that's not all, because Yan Chen ends up breaking the knife, and then give him a powerful kick to the stomach, so strong that he sent him flying, but despite the significant damage he sustained from the protagonist, the boy, completely fearless, tells Jen Chen that he's in trouble because his name is Lu Chifu, and his father's name is Lu Jianfu, and then asks and he is known as the Immortal Emperor, and furthermore, he has a vast harem of fairies, not protagonist if he understands the consequences of offending him. However, Jen Chen, tired of listening to him, grabs him by the collar and lifts him into the air. He tells him that he doesn't know who his father is, but he's going to keep one of his arms, and he'll see what his father is capable of doing. And of course, since the protagonist is grabbing his arm, the boy, upon hearing this, gets scared and asks the protagonist what the hell he's doing, telling him not to even think about it. But this is just very late, as Yan Chen ends up breaking his arm, and as he was leaving, he told the boy that he had 0.8 seconds to get out of there. The boy, without thinking twice, ends up doing so. But as he was leaving, he told the protagonist to remember him, and that moment very well. And well, the protagonist will definitely fall. To mention, he is the only genius in the immortal world to have been crowned into his hands, and revenge is certain. After this, the girl's grandfather, he ends up arriving at the place and, worried upon seeing his granddaughter tied up, he asks who did this to her, to which the girl responds by telling him that the person who did this to her is Lu Chifu. But luckily the protagonist appeared in time to fight him. The girl's grandfather, upon hearing that it was Lu Chifu who did this, angrily says that he will pay for it, but showing respect to the protagonist, he thanks him for his help, because if he hadn't shown up, his granddaughter Ayala Bueno would have fallen into the hands of a beast. However, Jen Chen, while holding a leaf between his fingers, tells the grandfather not to thank him yet, because he still hasn't finished, a statement that surprises the grandfather, who asks him, what, emperor in a mere 10,000 years, placing him on par with, do you mean by saying it's not over? However, as he says this, from the trees, this man suddenly appears, and he intends to attack the grandfather, and of course, his attack isn't just meant to harm him, but to take his life. However, the redhead, having already noticed this man, ends up throwing the blade he was holding at him, which ends up inflicting great damage to the attacker, and judging by his face, we can see that the attacker doesn't. He expected this sudden attack even less so from a simple blade, and he is surprised. He ends up backing away and, while stopping the bleeding with his hand, says that it was a idiot, since he didn't realize that the old man had an expert of such caliber with him, and he was definitely very careless, and since he knows that he is not going to win against the protagonist, he ends up leaving ancient, immortal emperors, or even surpassing them. With all that being said, Jen Chen, literally, his retreat was the best move, an option for him, especially since we know the protagonist can eliminate him with a simple snap, just like Thanos. He can make it disappear just like Thanos. However, Tianmin, witnessing all of this, he's quite surprised, but not by the attacker, rather, he's surprised by Yen's actions. Chen, and based on this, we are told that the real K has emerged, because Yan Chen just wounded a teacher with a single blade, and then said, so, if the protagonist is Capable of releasing his true energy, he is at least a grandmaster, he wonders. So, just imagine how many people can't even reach the rank of grandmaster, even after, of 100 years of training. With that being said, his thoughts are interrupted by the girl, who wonders what's going on, since she rises, and as he rises, we can see that there was a person there, warming up again. And of course, the grandfather, seeing this, gets quite worried, since he doesn't understands what is happening to his granddaughter, and Yen Chen confirms to M that he is correct. You are correct. The girl has been poisoned with a substance called lustful harmony, and if an antidote doesn't appear within half an hour, the girl will die. Words that only intensify the old woman's hatred for Lu Shifu for giving the legendary lustful harmony to his granddaughter, since it's clearly because of that substance is affecting his granddaughter, who is not feeling well at all. Upon seeing the girl's condition, the protagonist finds the girl. He warns the old man that he shouldn't untie her, because she itches a lot, and if they untie her, her clothes will tear, and if that happens, it won't pass manga review. And Tanmin literally says that upon seeing his granddaughter's state, specifically a woman, and of course, the protagonist notices this, but asks the protagonist what they can do, since there is no antidote, thus asking him if there's another way to fix it. Words that the prophet confirms that there is a way, but he needs a millennial insect in order to replenish his body. Afterwards, he asks Tianmin if he has it. Tianmin, upon hearing that there is a way, is slightly surprised and thinks to himself that there is also another method of detoxification for the poison, legendary figure, who is called Yan San, thus informing us that after the detoxification, Yan Chen's vitality will be severely damaged, and it is not. It's no exaggeration to say that he will need thousands of ginseng roots to nourish his kidneys, and based on everything Yan Chen said, he realizes that Yan Chen himself is a master. And, however, upon realizing that the person at his side, if his granddaughter can marry him, perhaps. However, he himself doesn't finish the utter a word, and ends up kneeling before the protagonist, begging him to save his granddaughter, and promising to do everything he can to get him some ginseng that is thousands of years old. Hearing this, the protagonist simply tells him that he is lucky to have met him, which prompts the man to thank the protagonist for saving his life, and without wasting any time, he tells the protagonist that he would like him to later, becomes fond of his granddaughter, but the protagonist doesn't say anything about it, and while he took off his clothes, he tells him that he is in a hurry and is going to start, and of course, the old man, seeing the protagonist's actions, gets the wrong idea, and therefore, he tells her that he's leaving, but Jenin stops him, saying that he doesn't actually is his wife, Chui Arun. He's impressed, and in his impressed state, he tells us that have to do anything and just needs to watch, which leaves the old man perplexed. He wonders to himself if he wants her to watch, but since he thinks the protagonist is going to do something inappropriate with his granddaughter, so she says she'd better leave, and while, as the protagonist watches him leave, he says that this antidote could weaken his immortal body. Immortal. So why is the old woman? No, she's not going to prepare the ginseng right now. But, looking at the girl, he tells himself that he has to forget about it, since, well, he would talk about it later. Later, having said that, Jen Chen decides to begin, and as she does, we can observe how the girl immediately begins to release an aura, in addition to the fact that she was making strange sounds. The old man, who was nearby, observing everything, is impressed, wondering if that is perhaps the power of a grand master, protagonist, that he has reached his time limit, and therefore, if he hands over in his previous life, he grew up in an orphanage and worked as a construction worker, and after graduating, saying that if he manages to get his granddaughter to marry the protagonist, his family will be protected. However, through this process, Jenin explains that this dust, it is, in fact, a peculiar poison, because his immortal energy was blocked when entered his body, and as a result, he has to exert more effort to break the barrier, and then use his essence to nourish her body, because in that way the disease will be cured. And while the girl was making strange noises, the prothalamus continues, saying that it's over, and no matter how strong the barrier is, it won't be able to withstand it. Resist the force of that deity, and the only thing left to do is input the essence and, as they do so, we can observe a great aura surrounding the protagonist and the girl, and upon feeling this aura, the girl says it's a sensation she's never experienced before. The university connected the eldest member of the Chul family with his granddaughter, Chui, and requested her presence. Felt before, It's as if her entire body is being nourished. While the protagonist was thinking to himself that he hadn't noticed, the girl possessed a rare ice phoenix physique, and he was somewhat impressed because he had never encountered one in the immortal realm. And furthermore, the protagonist comes to the realization that he realizes that the ice phoenix's essence had seamlessly integrated into his immortal body, and now his immortal body not only remained unharmed, but became stronger. And while continuing to heal, the narration tells us that at the peak of Kang's training, after only 3 minutes of rebirth and cultivation, he reached a state that took him 3 months to achieve in his previous life, which is truly amazing. Based on this, he becomes curious and wonders what kind of 12ers they hoped that she would marry him. However, once she joined the family, they ignored him. Body his wife possesses, as it would be fantastic if she could help him cultivate. Since this piques his curiosity, he'll have to figure it out someday. Half an hour later, the protagonist finishes up with the girl, and the old man, who was nearby, asks his granddaughter how she's feeling, to which she happily replies, telling him that it's incredible because the protagonist has not only eliminated the poison, but also the dizziness she'd been experiencing. Days have passed since their disappearance, and the protagonist explains the reason for it, telling us that, being an ice phoenix, he was simply feeling cold and, as a result of this, it was causing him headaches, but now he is fine thanks to her essence, thinking that if he guides the girl down the path of immortality, she will be able to help him return to. He couldn't find a job, was forced to cook at home, and was generally looked down upon. Naturally, himself, the grateful old man bows to Jen Chen to express his thanks for save his granddaughter's life. However, Jen Chen seizes this opportunity to tell the old man that if he truly wants to show his gratitude, he can buy that painting for 30,000 yen. However, the old man, while pulling something out of his jacket, tells the protagonist that he saved his granddaughter and is a great benefactor to Daoyu, the family, and 30,000 yen does not reflect his sincerity, and therefore, while handing it over, he tells him that the jade pendant is a family heirloom. It's worth 2 million yen, and he's giving it as thanks for saving his daughter. The protagonist, hearing this, tells the old man that it wouldn't be proper to accept. This was while he was thinking that Tianmin had saved him the trouble of buying he was considered a loser in their eyes. Furthermore, some wealthy children considered him a gift, and therefore, he would accept the jade as a birthday present. The old man, seeing Jen Chen accept the jade with delight, Tianla introduces himself as such, head of the Sun family, whose granddaughter is Sun Wanan, and then asks the protagonist his name, informing him that he will visit later in order to properly express his gratitude. The protagonist introduces himself as Tian Min, and after giving his name, he says that he must leave, but first warns him that he needs to pay attention to the darkness of his seal, as this indicates something threatens his family, is in danger from something impure. Words that surprise him quite a bit because, as he confided in the plot and asked for advice, he thought to himself, what time he has had his suspicions, since lately the family has been getting into bully and disregarded him completely in their pursuit of his wife. And to make things even worse, many problems, as if the family were possessed. Nevertheless, while Chen Chen, he was leaving, telling the old man that he now had to go to Mrs. Chu's birthday party. Mrs. Chu's birthday, saying, so, if you want to see him again, send someone to pick him up after the party. After Chen Chen left, the girl, a little doubtful, commented to her grandfather that her family was at least one of the best families in Chuzhou, asking him if he happened to, she's treating her terribly, to which her granddaughter responds by saying, who is still too young and doesn't yet understand what a master means to a family, and dispelling his doubts about Yan Chen. She tells him that overcoming the crisis may depend on the protagonist. In other words, she is literally, everything happened. Then a rich young master named Chenji set a trap for him and broke his, saying that his family will be saved from this crisis, and the protagonist decides, help them out. Afterwards, time passes and we're taken to this hotel where the hotel was hosting Mrs. Chu's birthday celebration. However, Jen Chen and her family eventually arrive at the location, and as she strolled, peacefully with a smile, she mentions that in her previous life, this was the very place where the wealthy young man harmed and assaulted his wife, but this time she is wanting to see his despair. However, the protagonist's thoughts are interrupted by these three people, and the woman, whose name is Lantern, who, in a mocking tone, tells the protagonist's relatives that they have the audacity to go to that party, saying that all of them have been expelled from the Chewy family mansion. So, legs, turning his wife into his plaything. In the end, Chenji kidnapped him to Northern. Therefore, they shouldn't believe that they can return to the mansion, which makes the protagonist's wife want to say something to her aunt. However, before she can do so, her mother intervenes to tell her sister not to mess with her because she doesn't want to argue, but her sister doesn't care. This, because, while laughing, she tells her that it's unfortunate her daughter has to marry a loser, words that bother her somewhat. But he tells her that her daughter married a loser, but his own daughter might not. She might not be able to get married. However, the woman tells her that she feels sorry for her. But her daughter's boyfriend is the lobby manager of the Galaxy Hotel, which bought a house in Tonjin, which leaves her speechless. But Burma and ended his life in a cage. Even as he died, as he leaves, he tells his sister that it's not easy coming to a party by bus, so he has to eat slowly and not choke. And on top of that, she makes fun of him, from his family, because he doesn't believe he can afford a birthday present. Decent one. With that being said, they start showing the gifts, and the first gift is from the Lee family, who present a gold bracelet valued at 30,000 yuan, and the second gift is from the Liu family, who are giving a pair of peaches from birthday, valued at 36,800 yen, from Mrs. Chu, who is an elderly woman, thanked all the elites from the political and business spheres for attending his birthday party, and while stating that they could bring any gift, she thinks to herself that it seems they will derive a small benefit from this, was still talking about saving his wife. However, even though he was fortunate enough to cross over to the birthday party, so the Chu family's finances might slow down a little. However, the next gift is from Chenchi, and the youngest master of the Chen family. The gift is a white-furred warhorse valued at 300,000 yuan. This introduces us to the person who gifted the horse. It's this red-haired man. People are surprised to see the Chen family at the party. Meanwhile, upon seeing who it is, Yen Chen becomes annoyed, quite a bit, because the wealthy young man who had wronged him in his past life was Chen Jiye. Because of him, he endured immense humiliation in his previous life, but this time, he will make him feel the true meaning of despair. The lady, realizing that he is such an important figure, looks at her granddaughter and says that it would be wonderful city and allows Suaran to accompany him for 3 days and 3 nights. They will immortal world by accident. The humiliation he suffered in the human world even by if she were to marry Mr. Chen, because if she did, her Chu family and the Chen family would be a powerful alliance, but she tells her own father and grandfather that she already has a boyfriend, which her mother doesn't care much about, since she says that even though her boyfriend is the lobby manager of their most luxurious hotel, that's a little, well, it's a little better than our useless protagonist. However, upon hearing the protagonist's name, the old woman says no. Mention that useless Jen Chen, because if his cousin hadn't insisted on marrying him, her family would have become a rich family a long time ago. Having said that, someone presents the next gift, and this gift is from our protagonist, who presents a jade pendant with an estimated value of 2 million. When he achieved immortality, a demon was implanted within his heart. However, upon hearing that it is valued at 2 million, people do not believe him. Nothing good comes to our protagonist, since they see him as a loser who has never worked since he got married, and therefore, he depends on his wife to support him. And, of course, the protagonist can't afford a 2 million gift, thus claiming that the jade is fake, since the protagonist is surely just pretending to be impressive. At this, the protagonist's mother-in-law angrily berates him, since it is very brave to do that, especially since it's fine if he wants to write about 10,000 or 8,000, but he shouldn't tell people it's simply fake. Literally no one has ever expected much from the protagonist, and for that reason, they think that this jade is false, and even his wife doubts the protagonist as she asks him what the hell is, but with a wide smile, he claims that in his previous life, he was the immortal emperor. Going on there, the lady, seeing that the jade is supposedly fake, complains to Jen. Chen deceived her with a fake, but the protagonist, even though they are yelling at him, remains unmoved. He remains unmoved, and with a cold look, he says that they are all just a bunch of blind ants. Blind. However, the lady, seeing that Jen Chen responded to her, became even angrier. She shouts, asking how dare he reply to her like that, saying that he is just a piece of shit. Breaking the jade, she says she doesn't want it, and to finish it off, she tells the protagonist leaves his party. And the red-haired man, upon seeing this situation, he approaches the protagonist and asks who he is, demanding how he dares to shout there. But as he himself got even closer to him, the protagonist simply says the red-haired man finally arrives. While looking at the protagonist and thinking to himself, however, he laments that those mortal grievances remain unresolved, saying that he heard that Yarun, the eldest granddaughter of the Chu family, is beautiful and fragrant, but, unsurprisingly, she married a loser. And referring to the protagonist, asks him if that useless guy is Jen Chen, questioning why. He doesn't leave. But while he was saying this, the protagonist simply was indifferent to his words. Seeing that the protagonist doesn't say anything, the lady asks him if he didn't hear what Mr. Chen said, and then says that he himself told the protagonist's wife to get out of the party, warns that they need to leave immediately because they can't afford to get involved with those people. However, the protagonist responds, telling him there's nothing to worry about. The people who were witnessing everything. Heaven is watching, and since he's been granted another great opportunity, he declares, "My wife, now that." They murmured that this useless idiot is crazy for daring to disobey the Lord. Chen saying, "So, the last time someone contradicted Mr. Chen, it was today." Next, he was hit by a car and remains so to this day. He's still in the hospital, wondering why that loser got into trouble with Mr. Chen. Getting back to the main point, Mr. Chen's companion. Mr. Chen asked him to let him take care of the protagonist, but this person, slightly annoyed, he asks if he's implying that he isn't worthy enough. However, as they were saying this, the protagonist tells us that in his previous life, everyone told him to get lost, and the redhead's men dragged him outside, broke his legs, and "I am here in this life, I will shield you from all harm." Nevertheless, like Yen, therefore, he thinks it's too cheap to kill him right away, and as he was placing, something was said about him needing to take his time, referring to the redhead. He tells him not to regret it, which the redhead mockingly repeats to the protagonist, saying he'll give him a job as a doorman and be there to cheer him on when he has relationships. And as he turned to look at the protagonist's wife, he said to himself that he'd rather bother his wife to her face, since that's what he enjoys. However, when he turns around, he notices that the protagonist's wife now looks like some kind of zombie, and naturally, this scares him quite a bit, as he believes she is a ghost, causing him to fall to the ground in fear, but it wasn't just the protagonist's wife he saw like that, but all the people who. Chen was quite close to his wife when she woke up, and he was surprised and approached him, which frightened him immensely. And, well, of course, all of this is the protagonist's fault, as he was the one who provoked it. All of this led him to perceive people in that manner. Seeing the redhead urinate, the people mocked him, as they hadn't anticipated such a reaction. The protagonist was happy, declaring that the show had only just begun. And, thus, out of nowhere, the redhead's pants suddenly burst into flames, which, this leaves him a bit disoriented, as he wonders where the fire originated. But since his priority is protecting the redhead, he tells his companion to extinguish the fire, which the companion does immediately. And of course, this must. He immediately pushes the protagonist away, asking him what was happening. Be painful. Because while they were putting it out, we could see how he was taking a lot of damage to his times member after the redhead extinguished it. The blonde asks his men to help him get up, and they comply. He asks the protagonist if he was the one who did all that, to which the protagonist, with a cold look, he responds by asking if he hadn't already told him to get lost and to go to the hospital, because if he arrives, it's too late. You won't be able to save the burned parts of him. These were his final words. This infuriates him, as he tells the protagonist that the situation cannot be resolved so easily. Therefore, he threatens him, saying that the Chu family's reign has come to an end. However, regrettably, this is how things will be. I'll leave this video here, but if you enjoyed it, please leave a like if you want to see more. Since they had agreed that he would sleep on the floor, but Jen Chen, approaching again. I'm leaving this video here, but if you liked it, please leave a like if you want to see more. Leave a like and remember this very well. The soul of the sluggard craves everything but attains nothing, but the soul of the diligent will be prospered. And without anything further to add, bye, bro. Again, he simply calls her wife, and then proceeds to give her a hug and spare his life. However, Jen Chen refuses this idea based on the simple fact, tells her that he has returned, and of course, since she herself doesn't know what the protagonist is talking, asking him where he had gone, to which the protagonist replies, telling him that he will explain it to him later, but what he needs to know right now is that from this moment on, if anyone dares to separate them, no matter who it is, will definitely turn them into a blood vest. However, just at that moment, after saying this, the mother-in-law suddenly appears to tell Chen Chen that, let go of her daughter, and here we wonder how Chen Chen should treat her mother-in-law, since the protagonist said that if anyone dares to separate them, no matter who it is, he will turn them into a vest of blood. But don't worry, my friend, that doesn't happen. Because before the protagonist speaks, Yuran asks his mother that he is a coward who collaborated with the evil forces and betrayed the why he comes in without knocking, to which his mother responds by asking him if couldn't she just go in and tell her that if she comes in a little later, the baby will be born? However, Jen, while looking at the lady, tells us that this is her best mother-in-law, Li Kuilan, and it was thanks to her that in his previous life he was married to his wife for a full 3 years and didn't touch her at all. Literally, the protagonist has never had relations with his wife, which is a very, regrettably, Mrs. Albert glares at him with irritation, as if the protagonist is being a nuisance. Calling him a loser, she demands to know why he isn't preparing breakfast, which is something he does. Ends up irritating Chen Chen, especially since he is the emperor of the immortal world. And yet, this woman is asking him to cook, if it weren't for her earlier actions, as he'd mentioned, immortals. And therefore he will carry it with him even if he dies. Words that are frightening to hear. Before, the woman would currently be nothing more than a puddle of blood. And naturally, as the protagonist, he does it for his wife, ultimately obeying the lady and withdrawing. Calmly, but as he walked past her, she told him that tonight is Mrs. Chu's birthday banquet, so he had to prepare his gifts. Because if she is happy, they might be allowed to return to the mansion. Words that the protagonist calmly takes in, but as he withdrew, he tells us that he remembers very well that at Mrs. Chu's birthday party, the rich kid who hurt him was there. But since the protagonist is not the same person from before, he wants to see how that person will try to hurt him this time. After the protagonist has done everything the lady told him to do, we can observe how everyone, this little one asks the protagonist if he wants to play with them, was enjoying the protagonist's food, but because the protagonist had already finished, he informs everyone that he is going to prepare a gift for Madame Chu Su. Given this, his father-in-law stops him and tells the protagonist to wait a minute, and, handing him something, he tells him to take that calligraphy and painting to the market of antiques and sell it. According to him, that painting is authentic, and it's worth 30,000 yen. And of course, he does all this so that the protagonist will buy him an expensive birthday gift for the old lady, which Yen Chen ends up completing, accepting, since his father-in-law approached him in good faith, and while he was telling him himself, the protagonist, who was a good person, thought to himself that his father-in-law is very naive, since if it were a genuine piece, it would cost more than 30,000 yuan, to which Yen Chen ends up denying the request and proceeds to do this. However, after doing, but he plans to go to the antique market every day regardless, to make a fortune by saying that his father-in-law, despite being a bit of a pushover, treats him very well, so he'll be carrying him from now on, meaning he will get along well with his father-in-law, but I don't think he'll get along well is with his mother-in-law, because when she saw that her husband gave something to the protagonist, she ends up scolding him. And of course, now I understand why the protagonist said that his father-in-law is a bit of a pushover. And while in the city, Jen Chen, while looking at the tall buildings, he says to himself that this world is devoid of spiritual energy, saying, so, after achieving immortality in the last world, I've returned to this small world, and legend has it that the spiritual energy was sealed by this. The protagonist wakes up somewhere else, which makes him wonder, some kind of great formation. And if the seal can be broken, the speed cultivation will potentially increase EXP for practically any practitioner. If this happens, many powerful factions would emerge. However, since that is not his priority, he says he will discuss lifting the seal later, because right now, he has just been reborn, so he first needs to find a place to recover. And noticing a certain location, he realizes that the spiritual energy, it's a very powerful place, so it will recover there first though. When the protagonist was planning to do this, he ends up overhearing someone screaming for help, and that someone is this girl, who found herself in a great predicament, because, as we can see, she was being restrained.